Without the humanities, there is no history, so it is inscribed. Welcome back to Ashoka University, where I'm chatting with Ashish Dhawan and Akhil Dhawan, his brother. Akhil, let me start with you. Your brother was told when he started his fund that life is too short to invest in India. Were you given the same advice?
A little bit.
What brought you back?
So I think the draw was more personal to some degree, as well as a belief that, India could sort of take off.
What do you manage in India now? 2008, what did you come to manage in India?
I moved back and really started a small fund for a group of outside investors, largely in the US and Europe, in the form of a public markets fund here called Locus, where we sort of focused on kind of long-term investing, 2, 3, 4, 5-year type investing, with a value mindset. We've kind of broadened that a little bit in the last few years to now manage some proprietary family capital as well. And so now it's a combination of sort of proprietary as well as outside capital, all focused on Indian public markets.
Correct. Your brother, Ashish, had an inflection point investing, getting ahead of a sector, finding management with hunger in their belly. What is your investment style?
We'd love to do that if we could find those types of opportunities.
But
I think we really focused. So I started life, I'd say, as a true blood sort of value investor. Really looking for things that were cheap, optically textbook cheap, mispriced. And have over the years, having gained more experience in the market, gravitated a little more to appreciate quality. As we spent time following companies, have begun to understand the nuances of what makes good companies great and not so good companies remain sort of mediocre.
Are there any sectors that look attractive to you for the last 5 years and for the next 5 years? Are there any long-term secular plays in India?
Sure. So I think given where we are in our evolution as an economy, our belief is that clearly the sectors that are levered to domestic consumption serve as great proxies for what India should become, and really the transition is sort of moving from a poor economy to some degree, relative to the rest of the world, and that being more maybe favoring more staple type consumption versus us getting to kind of a middle income economy where discretionary consumption becomes a much more important theme. And that's some of the things we've been sort of,
Ashish, let me come back to you. You want a second career in your life, don't you? I mean, you've handed over the reins to your team at Chris Capital, and your brother talked about going from a third world country to a first world country. That doesn't happen without education, does it?
Yeah, as I've said before, I don't think you can have a first world country with third world education, which is what India has. We're second last in the world in education, and yet we say that we're an emerging superpower. And so I think it's great that we're focusing on skilling, but let us not forget that skilling is the repair business and education the prepare business. So whilst I think it's important to focus on skilling because it will give quick wins, we really need to invest in core education, both primary education and secondary and higher education as well.
Tell me a little bit about your dream at this beautiful university that I'm in, Ashoka University. How did you start it and what is your ambition for this?
So a few of us came together as friends with the idea that India, we were really disturbed by the fact that there was no Indian university in the top 200 in the world. We also could see that Indian higher ed is moving towards more cookie-cutter professional education. Almost everyone we were hiring was very unidimensional. They were smart, but didn't know how to write, never read a book, never really loved learning, just focused on rote memorization and mastering a specific body of knowledge. So felt that something had to change. And India has historically, if you go back into antiquity, had a great tradition of liberal education, Nalanda and Takshila. And so really the idea was to bring that back to our civilization. And that's what Ashoka is attempting to do.
I say, what would you do if I ask you another question? If a lot of people ask me that, how do I become a second Ashish Dhawan? How do you become a second Ashish Dhawan?
I think by being a liberal arts person. Because if you are a Renaissance person and you have multiple interests in life, you can then pursue multiple careers. You're not afraid of saying, I had one phase of my life, I did reasonably well or I did okay, I can move on to trying something new. Because it's always the fear that holds us back. All of us are blessed, in a sense. We are in that top 0.1 percentile.
Absolutely.
And so we aren't going to take risk. And I mean not just risk with our capital, but risk with our time and our careers and what we do in terms of impact with our lives, and who will.
And liberal arts will give you that platform?
I believe so. I think the seed was sown a long time back. You know, I could see in college, when I went to Yale undergrad, the highest aspiration was to serve the country and serve the world. My best and brightest friends did not go to Wall Street. They actually went to work for Supreme Court judges and went to work for senators and went and started NGOs. And that was a wake-up call for me. And some of the wealthiest people, John D. Rockefeller V lived in my dorm, took the train back home to DC.
Really? Rockefeller?
Yeah. So I think that left a deep impact in terms of the way you live your life, the way you handle money, what you want to do with your life. The fact that I read Benjamin Franklin when I was quite young and said, this guy can do 7 things in his life, at least I can try to do 2.
Let me go through 7 names in your life and tell me what you think about them. First thoughts. John Mason.
Inspiring teacher.
Where?
In school.
Okay. Benjamin Franklin.
Liberal arts person. Renaissance man.
George McCown.
Humanitarian and investor.
Raj Kondor.
A good friend and risk taker.
Shiv Nadar.
Philosophical man.
Chico.com.
Disaster.
Okay. Central Square Foundation.
My passion.
India in 2030, what happens to it?
Well, hopefully a first world, country.
15 years?
Close to it, at least by social standards, hopefully we get, significantly better. By income standards, if measured by income standards, we get up there too.
Are you both optimistic about India? When you started your career in 98, you were optimistic. You came back to India in 2007, you were optimistic. 20 years and 10 years later, are you still optimistic?
I'm super optimistic. It's not looking at industries and looking at numbers and stuff like that. It's when you come to Ashoka and you meet young people, you realize the potential of India. I think it's amazing what this generation is doing. It's very different from the generation that I grew up in. And so that gives me hope that India is going to be a different place in 20 or 30 years.
Is the political establishment awake to this problem?
I think the current government is. And it's, I think that the market is frustrated. But some of the changes and reforms that are being put in place are quite fundamental. I mean, the black money bill, I think, is fantastic. Or just putting everything out to auction is fantastic. Crony capitalism has been a huge problem for the 15 years I've been here as an investor.
In all emerging markets too.
And India, it hasn't improved one bit.
How about you? You share his optimism?
Yeah, I tend to share all of that.
Great. There's an old saying that old soldiers never die. They just fade away. The same is true for old math teachers. They never die, but they tend to infinity. Ashish, you have a rich legacy. I think you're following in good footsteps. My thanks to both of you for joining me on the Wizards of Dalal Street. We'll see you next week on an all-new episode of the new Wizards of Dalal Street. Bye from Ashoka University.